Jim, I'm not a safety expert at all. Perhaps Rob can respond to this as well as yourself. A little bit delicate, I suppose, but most problems, when you try to find solutions for them, you start by trying to understand the cause. And we're talking here about a variety of things, some that have to do with, in our case, TriMet, the equipment, the operators, and then the other side of the equation is the person on the street that is perhaps a rider, but perhaps a pedestrian or a bike rider, or all three. Is there any analysis done about accidents on any level in mass transit about who's at fault? I hate to use that phrase, but I don't know how else to say it eloquently. Are they is there some indication that more are caused by the transit agency or more by the customer, the citizen, the pedestrian, the bike rider?
There is, but it's by agency basis only. It's not spun up into a national level database that can be filtered or queried as such. Within transit, there is something called the National Transit Database, which records both policing-based events and then safety-based events. However, it's recorded as a fatality. There is no additional information, or it's recorded as an injury. There's no additional information as to whether that injury or that fatality was based on an unsafe action by the pedestrian or the patron, and or whether that event was an unsafe action or activity by the operator. If it's recordable for NTD. However, that data is available at the agency level through the agency accident incident investigation process. And the investigation process usually will make a determination, preventability, non-preventability, and causal factor or contributing factor. In the case of the mother and infant event that I just had mentioned, it was clearly documented that the mother stepped off against the pet indication into the bus. The video showed that her head was down, that she was not attentive. The bus operator had followed all the rules and procedures in relationship to appropriate training. She had followed everything exactly to her training standards. However, it's an event and it gets recorded as such and it gets spun into a database. So there was no additional clarification as to the fault. It's still a recordable.
As a follow-up to that question, I mean, it's hard to, I would imagine, get into how you would measure the success of this, but have you seen other metropolitan communities either trying to raise awareness of bus or train rail operators through public campaigns or communication, and seen success of that in a way that's measurable? Because we just talked about, incidences which can, in essence, be out of the control of the transit professional, but I appreciated how we started this conversation. It's still up to the transit professional to take the responsibility overall to keep everything kind of that synergy moving. But are there other things that can be done to increase awareness among pedestrians, bike riders, and such to increase that? Have you seen success in that area? I mean, again, it seems like hard to measure, but...
It's very hard to measure, but there are successes, and again, the measurement tool is to continue to have low incident rates. So I attribute the success with a program and a low incident rate. But that's a difficult metric to follow, but I try to make the link. And yes, agencies I've worked with a number of agencies, have very strong advocacy, outreach programs. They work very closely with the community of the disabled to bring them in and evaluate their system on a constant basis, constantly taking snapshots of their environment as to what we can do to continue to change. They bring in the biking community. They bring in Hawaii, they've got a surfboard community because everybody brings a surfboard on board buses. Well, they're going to bring them on board the trains when the trains start running. How do we deal with surfboards moving through a train that rapidly decelerates? But by working with those types of users of the system, a more safe system is ultimately created.
What about general pedestrians? So we could probably, tap those communities that you mentioned, and there may be organizations that have, venues for there to be a communication channel. If I'm just a mom with my kids walking down the street, what's my level of engagement on understanding how that traffic flow, and has there been any successes in that?
Well, again, I found out firsthand about Portland's unique interface with the blogging community and getting just information out through blogs, through public chat rooms. I know Charlotte does that routinely to just get the word out about system changes, system configurations. The safety department does outreaches with schools on a weekly basis. They do outreach with community user groups on a weekly basis. So, they work with, Operation Lifesaver to continue to expand the grade crossing safety programs, and work with the Operation Lifesaver folks to get those folks out there, and continually work with youth drivers. We actually had a program in Baltimore where we were able to get the DMV to add additional questions to the licensing bureau about grade crossing safety, so that we added 5 questions to the general licensing, questionnaire that talked about negotiating rail-based grade crossings and what you're supposed to do with the pavement indications and what happens if the gate arms come down and you're underneath the gate arm. That changed a number of the grade crossing incidents that agency had once we were able to get those programs in place. So those are the proactivity that we would look for.
Going back to that recommendation about expanding a safety department with a bit more responsibility, those types of things would fall under that, to expand control of that group of people.
Most definitely, as well as we're dealing with the internet community or the blogging community, might be something that the public information officer can interface with too. It's always important to get positive messages out.
Right.
The agency, well, we saw a lot of positive. I mean, I know we have a lot of recommendations, but there's a lot of positives. The riding community doesn't know all the positives, and we don't do a really good job in TriMet, I think, broadcasting the positives.
Steph?
I'm sorry, I'm asking so many questions. I get downright chatty when I'm around this. The question of, a lot of our major buses are along arterials. A lot of the buses are 9, R4, R72, are not just on busy roads. They're also, they're highway bypasses. So, and obviously the speed of those streets with pedestrian interactions and a lot of cross activity really increases the likelihood of a crash. So has there been any consideration of neighboring streets, near arterials that are close to trip generators? Has there been any consideration of slightly lower traffic so that the severity or the possibility of collisions is considered when planning a route?
Yes, but typically route planning is about expediency first. And that was our whole concern about when we sat down with the planning and scheduling department, was to look at when you lay out a new route, or if you're cutting a new run, what's the driving force? And again, with a systems approach to safety within an organization, cutting a run is a safety-related function first. Are we cutting it safely? Are we giving them enough time, the operator enough time? Are we taking into account the fact that maybe we've got community centers close by that might have individuals that have mobility issues? That route needs to accommodate that, because every route is going to have some level of delay to deal with those mobility-based boardings. So to answer your question directly, it comes from routing and scheduling. If scheduling and the planning folks are willing to take a little bit longer to deal with that run, then yes, agencies have used peripherals and less direct routes because they are safer, especially when they've tried to eliminate left-hand turns. It's forced them to maybe take less direct routes.
But also the point, if the driving ethic is safety and service excellence, then operations will properly led proceed exactly in the direction you're talking about. We don't cut runs for absolute minimal time. We cut runs for safety and service excellence.
Yes, sir. And that goes back to culture. Yeah, I think you mentioned genetics. It's institutionalized that this is the way we do business.
DNA is a term I use. I don't know what
Yes, sir.
genetics are. But
So, the agenda item is on innovative designs. I'm curious whether there's things that we're not talking about that we haven't thought about that are out there that we could be looking at from whether it's a design engineering perspective that could help mitigate hazards that we're currently not doing, or there are things that we're doing that are creative designs that we shouldn't be doing because they're putting people at risk.
I actually,
Rob?
do you mind if I have I have a question really related
Go
to
ahead.
that. So TriMet operates with within multiple jurisdictions, probably over 20, I don't know how many. And so I'm curious if there's a forum, I see Josh has left, maybe Neil, you can help. If there's a forum where TriMet is directly interfacing with all those jurisdictions at one time about these issues, and I was thinking specifically about these design issues, because what works downtown Portland is not going to work in East Portland, it's not going to work in Beaverton, or whatever the cases may be. They all have different road standards and different ways that they want to deal with these things. And I mean, it's possible they could collaborate and think comprehensively if they're all in the room together. And so I'm wondering, do you all ever get in the room together to talk about transit facilities, not necessarily rail lines?
To my knowledge, there isn't such a forum. And we do, in other governmental areas, certainly work with our jurisdictional partners. I would say that we work probably most closely with the city of Portland, because when you sort of look at this concentration of routes within where they all end up in the most congested areas, the city of Portland, I think we've got a good relationship there. But which is not to say that there shouldn't be more.
Thank you.
And I think also there's a relatively new technical advisory committee that it sounds almost similar. I think it's very focused, but the pedestrian network analysis technical advisory committee that has most of the jurisdictions planning staff present as they're talking about prioritizing transit environment improvements.
Who are they advisory to?
They're advisory to TriMet.
Oh,
It's directly under Jessica.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's also, Metro has, within the past 6 months, convened a safety committee, working committee, I guess I would call it, that has representation from most all the jurisdictions in the region. That might actually be a good forum for some of this discussion, because it's looking at a system level and a pretty high planning level as to safety performance and how do we want to improve safety as a planning and performance area in the region.
I'm
So,
also
Rob,
part of...
respond to Rob's question, are there other technical and innovative things that this discussion hasn't yet touched on?
Well, I mean, I think there is quite a broad spectrum of roadway, street design, operational things that we can talk about in the way of safety, but the driving factor for me is to understand, what problem we're trying to mitigate. So until we, really have a clear view of this is the types of problems that we're focusing on, then I think it's a little premature to say these are, this is the whole tool set of what we want to bring to bear, because, we may be just putting, we may have a solution looking for a problem, but I think we need a better understanding of what we're trying to mitigate.
Could be